to the 2019 Wilderness Issues Lecture Series. If this is your first time here, welcome even more. My name is Joanna Campbell, and I'm the Director of Education Programs at the Wilderness Institute, which is part of the Franke College of Forestry and Conservation here at the university. This year's theme is titled Wild Hope: Fearless Risk-Takers, Art Makers, and Storytellers on the Wilderness and Conservation Frontlines. So we've been exploring the ways in which people of different wilderness and conservation backgrounds have been navigating challenging and difficult times. This is our last lecture in the series. I think this is the first lecture maybe many of you have come to where you didn't have to travel over snow and ice. So that's always a good opportunity. If you would like to stay informed about what the Wilderness Institute is doing, I encourage you to check out our website, which you can find at the University of Montana website, or you can find the Wilderness Institute on our Facebook page. I'd also like to thank MCAT for being here once again and for recording all of the lectures for this series. A quick little announcement. We at the Wilderness Institute are in the process of launching an updated, new and improved wilderness website, and we are looking for some volunteers who would be willing to spend about 45 minutes to an hour of your time doing a test run of that website. If you are interested and willing to do that, please see me after class. So, on to the fun part. Becca Skinner is here with us tonight. Yahoo! Yeah. So Becca was born into a family of adventurers and raised in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado and the high plains of Wyoming. This environment fueled a lifetime passion about wild places and exploring. While studying social work and technical writing at the University of Wyoming, Becca won a National Geographic Young Explorer grant to document post-tsunami Sumatra, Indonesia. That trip sparked a leave from school, which led to 32,000 miles of living out of a car, traveling and photographing the West. She now resides in Bozeman, Montana, and works as an adventure and conservation photographer and writer. Welcome, Becca Skinner.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes? All right.
I'm going to dim the light. I think. Maybe.
Does that look okay back there?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hello. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I know I was supposed to speak a few weeks ago, and so thank you so much for those of you that postponed a month and came tonight. My name is Becca Skinner, and like Joanna said, I am a conservation and adventure photographer and writer, and I live over in Bozeman. So I wanted to talk to you all tonight about how my job intersects wilderness and art, and it's a lot because I'm in the outdoors a lot. I work a lot with conservation groups and outdoor companies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background of what it means to be an adventure photographer. So my job is different almost every day. Each trip is really different. You have to be comfortable living outside for long periods of time in a variety of climates. My super balmy -40 day up here. So really, part of what I love about this job is I'm outside all the time. It keeps me on my toes. I get to be outside, and I get to be a really cool, I see my job as a translator, so I get to go outside and take photos of what I'm seeing and translate it into something digestible or clickable for people back home or on social media, everything, so that people can see the cool, wild places that there are in the world. So I didn't always want to be an adventure photographer. I didn't even know what that meant at a young age. But there are two big things that sent me down the path of this. And the first is I had two geologists as parents. And for family vacations growing up, we would go into the Wyoming desert for weeks at a time, camp and walk around. And I thought every family did this up until I was about 13, and everyone else was going to Disney World and Disneyland, and I felt like I got totally gypped until I became an adult, and I think that that's the coolest thing that my parents could have done for me at a young age, and my siblings, because we got to be outside, and they encouraged us to explore and use our curiosity and just walk. That's one big thing I took away from childhood, is walking for the sake of just looking around and seeing what exists in the place. And the other big thing was I was raised in this family of extreme mountaineers and rock climbers, so I had adventure as this kind of normal backdrop in my everyday. And a family member would come home from an expedition, and we would all set up shop in the living room, and they would show slideshows of Africa and the Middle East and these amazing climbing locations and culture, and that's what I got to grow up with. So I just thought that I had a pretty normal family. So when I got to college, I wasn't totally sure what to study. I was shooting photos for fun, but I didn't really know if I wanted to turn it into a job, so I decided to study social work, and I wanted to go down the path of outdoor therapy, so taking kids outside as a form of therapy. And then a professor actually encouraged that I also studied writing, so I worked on my grant writing skills in the technical writing branch of the university. And I started to do this, but pretty soon into college, I was skipping class to go rock climbing, to go taking photos, and I definitely don't encourage that, but I realized that I was starting to focus way more time on this thing that I thought was really cool, and I was exploring, and it was hands-on, and I was creating these images that I had an idea of what I wanted it to look like, and then getting to photograph them and seeing them come to life and actually portraying the feeling that I wanted to convey was the coolest breakthrough for me. And it didn't happen every time, but the more I did it, the more I practiced. So these are two of the first photos in my, not even career, but in my photographic life that I took, that I felt like, oh, that actually told the story that I wanted to tell through the photos. So as I was shooting photos on the side and going to my classes in social work, a friend passed on a grant opportunity to me through the arts department to go to New Orleans and photograph how New Orleans had recovered from Hurricane Katrina 5 years past. So I applied and wrote an essay and submitted images that had nothing to do with post-natural disaster communities, and I won this opportunity to go. And not ever having been on an assignment before, I said, 2 days is enough time to bring back 25 gallery-worthy images, which in retrospect, I like to spend at least minimum 3 weeks in a place, so just to give you an idea. So I realized as the trip got closer, I started to fully panic and emailed everyone I knew to see who knew people in New Orleans. And through that, I got connected to a lot of great people that introduced me to places like this, where this is outside of the tourist kind of locale downtown in New Orleans. And as you got further and further out from the city, there were more and more signs of a hurricane that had come through or a disaster. And what I learned was it's very expensive to tear buildings down. In my naive mind, I thought, well, you just run a bulldozer over it and call it good, and that's not the way that it works. So this old school, this is an old cafeteria, totally riddled with black mold. Right next to it, a playground. So you can imagine that the health consequences of these two being right next to each other is not ideal. But like I said, it's expensive to tear things down. And then I met Robert Greene, who worked with National Geographic and told his story for the magazine for post-Hurricane Katrina stories. And Robert told me his heartbreaking story of climbing on top of the roof. He lived in the lower Ninth Ward with his family, and his mother and his nephew climbed into the attic, and they had no way to escape the attic, so he cut a hole in the roof so they could climb on top of the roof to be potentially rescued. And the water eventually rose so high that it lifted the roof off the top of his house, floated it down the road to this tree where it crashed into the tree, and his mom and his nephew fell off and drowned in front of him. And I get goosebumps every time I tell that story, but the photo reminds me of that, of the feeling of connecting back to a place or a person or an event that was so traumatic, but he's working so hard to make sure that this never happens again. And there were more photos of Robert that exemplify more hope, but I wanted to give you an example of telling a story through an image. And this little playhouse covered in rubble was in the house right next door to Robert's house. This is Miss Helen, and as we were driving past, I made my friend stop the car because she has the most beautiful wrinkles, and I had to photograph her if she would let me. And she was 92 in 2010, and she walked about 5 miles from her home to the Superdome and was turned away at the door and had to walk back to her home and wait out the storm with her family. Like, look at those eyes. How much life has this woman seen? And then this is a church that's still standing. Again, such a beautiful building full of stained glass, and again, just totally riddled with black mold. So I came back from this trip, and I was so excited about telling stories of post-natural disaster communities, and I wanted to figure out how to do this again because no one, at the 5-year mark, this was in 2010, so 5 years past Hurricane Katrina, people were kind of doing a look back on the past 5 years in New Orleans and how they had recovered. But there are so many natural disasters that happen outside of the U.S. and even in the U.S. that it's massive and so many people perish, and as we get further away from that event, we don't take a look at how communities are rebuilding, and a lot of the future of the community is dependent on how they're recovering or how they're not recovering. So I knew I wanted to focus on this again. So I applied for a National Geographic Young Explorers grant when I met a photographer named James Baylog, and you might recognize his name. He does the Extreme Ice Survey, and he photographs a lot of receding glaciers. He traveled to Banda Aceh, Sumatra, immediately following the tsunami in 2004. And just to remind you, tsunami was in December 2004, 9.2 on the Richter scale, massive. It was right off the coast of Sumatra, so this is very, very close to the epicenter, Banda Aceh. And across 14 countries, there were 230,000 people that died. So, huge event. And James, right after this happened, knew he wanted to fly immediately to Sumatra, and he decided to just photograph whatever he saw for 2 days. And when I met him, he was asking me what I was doing with my career and with my work, and I told him about Hurricane Katrina, and he said, "Crazy, I wonder what Sumatra looks like." And so we kind of came up with this idea that I would travel with his images with a friend of mine, another photographer from the University of Wyoming, Chris Michael, and we took printouts of all of his images, and that was the only information we had on how they were recovering. This was in 2011, so 7 years down the road. Top of a mosque, huge concrete structure that floated about 8 miles inland. into this rice paddy. And for scale, I'm sure you have already seen, but if you haven't, there's a guy on the left here that's dressed in white, just to give you scale. We ended up finding that same mosque top, and this is Juan that owns the rice paddy, and it was too heavy to move it out and move it off his property, so they decided to put lights around the top, and every night Juan lights it up as a remembrance for those who died in the tsunami. So again, this is another photo from James. You can see everything's totally decimated. This is right next to the coast. And this is what it looks like now. So things have grown back, but the important thing to note is the red roof houses down here. And though very well intentioned, these were houses built by aid workers that maybe built them quickly and weren't familiar with Sharia law, which is in place in this province. And the bathroom faced the kitchen and therefore was not up to code, and so no one lives in these homes. The majority of them are not lived in because they're not up to Sharia law. This was a fun one because it's a huge province, and I thought there was no way we're going to find a yellow house in the middle of an entire province. And it turns out that the house looks exactly the same, and it was very easy to find. But there's a very key detail in this image, which to the left of the yellow house, there's a parking lot structure, and that is a tsunami escape building, which they did not have in place. The lack of tsunami education and what to do when a tsunami was coming was a major part of why so many people died. So when the water receded, there were a bunch of fish left on the beach, and people living on the coastline, being fishermen, were really excited about that. So went out to get fish, and then when the wall of water came back in, they drowned. So this is a really, really good step. And one of my favorites. Can you spot the barge in the middle of the city? Yes? No? Okay, for those of you that can't, right above me here. So you can now pay 1 penny and climb to the top of this barge so you can see the city. So I came back from this expedition living one of my greatest dreams, working with National Geographic, and there was all of this momentum and excitement, and I felt like all of the doors were open to me, and it was almost paralyzing. And I'm sure some of you have felt this in your life, where you feel like all of the opportunities in front of you and you're not really sure what direction to go because it's all there. And grant programs take time, and I didn't know if I wanted to still apply for grants and just keep down this path of post-natural disaster communities, or what I really wanted to do. But I decided I didn't want to live in Wyoming anymore, and so like a good 21-year-old, I packed up everything into my car, which was not a lot of possessions, and I decided to go for a big, long road trip across the West until I ran out of money. So that turned into a pretty long road trip, about 8 months, and in that 8 months I went 32,000 miles around the West, and I got a really fun, unique job writing letters for the North Face, which came about in a funny way, but kids would write the North Face letters, handwritten letters, and the North Face would ship me a box of letters to a post office, and I would handwrite kids' letters back. So if you've ever received a letter from me, if you wrote to the North Face, it was me that wrote it. So traveling around the West was great, and I knew I wanted to keep doing photography. Then I just decided to simplify, and while I decided what to do, I was going to photograph what I was doing, was my mindset, and a lot of that turned into my future work. So in this photo, we are in Canyonlands National Park, and this was about the time where Instagram started to rise significantly, and there was a lot of conversations going on about the impact of more people coming into national parks and what that traffic looked like for the future of national parks. And so my friend Hillary in the red in this picture, we had a great conversation, and she wrote a piece about how your Instagram photo is not worth ruining the cryptobiotic soil that you could be stepping on to get your Instagram photo. So we're having those conversations, and that turned into how can we protect land or these places for future generations that want to enjoy them, and we want to give that on to them. That slowly, this is over the course of years, morphed into people's relationship with land and wildlife. So I wanted to focus on how does a place make you feel, and people's relationship to a place if they've grown up there and they care about that place enough to protect it, and just how to tell those kinds of stories. And this became really fun and interesting to me because I got to be outside. I was doing all of the things that I was doing on vacation, but for work, and that felt kind of fun and unfair. But I started to build this portfolio and get hired by outdoor companies to photograph for them. And then I also started this very slow, long-term project on falconry and rehabilitation centers, specifically birds of prey and rehab centers. And the two groups of people don't necessarily get along with each other, but there was a group of falconers in Bozeman that were working with the rehabilitation center to rehab a golden eagle through falconry practices. So I was photographing this group of falconers and then also going to rehabilitation centers and photographing their relationship with their wildlife too. This is Comet, the golden eagle. And I was photographing Comet for about 2 years when they decided to release him, and there was some confusion or some debate on whether or not he was ready to be released. And having a bird of prey is a very complicated process, especially eagles, because they're all federally protected. And they ended up releasing Comet, and he was found dead in a field 2 weeks after he was released. Just additional projects that I've gotten to do. I wrote a story for a rafting company on the 50th anniversary of Wild and Scenic Rivers and went down the Middle Fork of the Salmon. And in that essay, I talked about why a place is worth protecting, especially a place like this. And while we were there, we found Native American artifacts, and there were bear and bighorn sheep. And I mean, anyone who spent time in this place knows why it needs to be protected, but hopefully to get that out to a larger audience to show and to describe why this place is valuable. And then I've been able to do projects for the state in a really fun way through Montana State Parks. And this is at Big Arm State Park on Flathead Lake. And I, with State Parks, came up with kind of a list of state parks that were being underused, and they felt like there were these really cool recreational opportunities in them, and how could we highlight more of that. So these are my favorites, and I highly recommend, if you haven't been, to check all of these out. Big Arm State Park is beautiful in the fall, and we kayaked, my friend Louise and I kayaked from Big Arm to Wild Horse Island State Park. And Wild Horse Island State Park quickly became one of my favorite places in the world. And part of that is the amount of bighorn sheep that are there, and they're using that as a site to help foster the bighorn sheep population, remove some sheep to supplement other populations. And there's very few natural predators on this island, so you come across giant mule deer bucks. And it's hard to believe that a place like this exists in Montana, an island in the middle of massive Flathead Lake, It is so cool and so worth going to. So I went from this project across the state to Makoshika State Park, which is a totally different ecosystem. It was Badlands. It looks like something out of A Land Before Time, if you all have ever seen that movie. Crazy dinosaur land. And a totally different ecosystem. So you have these long spines coming down off the mountains, or I guess the rolling hills, and just creating these really amazing formations. And for this project, we were the first people to be allowed to backpack through the park, and you can now do that. And it is so amazing. And while we were walking, I found this frog, and it's like, wait, we're in the Badlands, there's a frog. I don't understand how that matches up, so I reached out to a friend that studies frogs. It's a boreal chorus frog, and they actually thrive off of seasonal streams and bogs that exist here. So just the diversity of wildlife even in this place. There's elk that live here, obviously mule deer, boreal chorus frogs, and just amazing, amazing scenery. And by doing this project for Montana State Parks, I just wanted to show people that maybe there's some other opportunities that might even exist in your backyard that are not Yellowstone, that are not Glacier, and those parks have amazing things in them. And you can also do something that will take a weekend that you don't have to quit your job or skip school or take a ton of time off to do something like camp for a night in one of these state parks that's in your backyard. And then where my work is moving now is really something that I feel really excited about, and that's photographing people and their ties to land. And I feel like I've done that through post-natural disasters, now coming into this place of talking to ranchers who are doing regenerative land work on their properties, who are protecting large swaths of land for wildlife to keep it from being subdivided and keep wildlife migration corridors open through their property. And also talking about ranching, the future of food systems, what ranching looks like right now in a variety of places. So this is a project that I worked on through a photography workshop in Missouri. And this is Ernie. He's a cattle rancher. And so highlighting some of these tougher moments, and Ernie works 3 jobs at 3 other ranchers to pay the bills. His wife also has 3 jobs. And like a lot of us know, ranching communities, agricultural communities, everyone does a little bit of everything to keep the ball rolling. And then just the day-to-day, what does it look like to have your life revolve around calving season, where you're checking on your calves multiple times a day. He counted his cows 3 times a day, and by the end, like, I know exactly how many cows he has. I know where we can find them. He had 210. And then the future of ranching and what that might look like for Ernie. So this job is my total dream job. It's interesting, it's exciting for me, and my ultimate goal with it is that if someone sees one photo or even a glimpse of it, or a caption or a location, that they are inspired to either go or to protect that place, because we don't often understand why a place is worth protecting until we know what exists there. So hopefully by nature of photographing these wild and scenic places, then we can better protect the lands for future generations and ourselves. So I always like to end my presentations on this photo because it's my favorite, and also a Mary Oliver quote, which is, "Tell me, what is it that you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Thank you guys for having me, and I'm happy to answer questions. Questions?
Well, what's the image
This one? Yeah, this is a group of starlings. It It was taken in Pavilion, Wyoming, which is a small blink of a town. And I came out to my family's alfalfa field, and it was the morning of my 23rd birthday. And it was a shot that I didn't mean to take, and when I looked at it on my computer, I fell in love with it. Maybe it's the time and place, but the feeling that I get from it is really special.
I wish you had more images. They're really fantastic. What do you use for your equipment?
Sure. I'm using a Canon 5D Mark III, and I just also got a Sony, one of the small ones, because it won't ruin your neck. And yeah, that's what I'm using with a variety of lenses. Any other questions? Let's start here and we'll go on.
Do you do much digital editing, or is this pretty much what comes from your equipment?
This is pretty much how it looks in this one. The exposure is turned a little bit up, and then the warmth, but in terms of layering or altering in a way, I try and follow the photojournalism rule, which is the less editing, the better. And the ones from Missouri, I was not, throughout the workshop, you're not allowed to edit your images. So, yeah.
As someone who has similar dreams, what is your advice to kind of achieve that level of just photography and just what you're doing right now?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that helped me, and everyone has such different paths, so take it with a grain of salt. When I was in college, I got a dog that needed to be walked every day, and so I would just take my camera out, and I made myself take at least one photo a day, and it got me in the habit of just, in an effort to not take the same photo, try and take a look at the things that maybe other people were overlooking and take my time. So practice was one thing, and then networking and talking to other photographers that were so far and are so far above me. I still glean a ton of information and insight from them. So yeah, reach out to the people that you would want to work for, that you want to work with. There are a ton of photographers in Missoula that are doing cool things, and if you like their work, reach out and ask if they need an assistant, or if you can come in to their studio or on a trip with them, or maybe not even a trip, but a day in the field, and try learning that way. And if you're a student, there's so many cool opportunities within the university for funding, for projects. I'm sure that's the case here too. Yeah.
Where did you say you went to college, and then you said you have a degree in social work? How do you think that has changed your perspective on the work that you do? Follow up on that, how have people treated you differently having a degree as a photographer?
Yeah, I love that question. I went to school at the University of Wyoming, and I did not finish my social work degree. So I do feel like it gave me a phenomenal base in the practice of listening, and especially listening to hard subject matter, and that's constantly developing, and I'm still working on it. And I think being in a small town in Missouri where people's political and life views were very different than mine, getting advice from mentors by saying, this story is not about you. You're here to listen. You're here to photograph their story, not yours. And so that practice has definitely helped me ask better questions and be a better listener, having that social work base.
Trying to, I think, connect with anybody can be pretty daunting in regards to how do you do it or how do you go about it. And then from a photographer or journalist point of view, capturing and trying to see vulnerability is equally tough from, I guess, the capturer or artist end going that way. Do you have a tool or a way you'd like to approach a subject like Mrs. Helen? Is that right?
Yeah, Ms. Helen?
Yes. How does one get access to these intimate moments?
Access takes time. Good access takes time. And when you're short on time, I think people like being asked questions about their lives, especially if they don't have the opportunity to talk about themselves much. I think it can be uncomfortable at first, but giving people a platform to share their stories and then genuinely responding and asking them further questions about that, and then also paying attention to cues and whether, asking about grief and loss is hard. And so listening to cues where they're saying, not like we can't go there, then redirecting it to, what brings you joy? What do you do? Tell me what your day's like. And I think people just don't get asked those questions. So that has helped me get access.
What you do kind of a combination of conservation, photography, and productorial sort of things.
Yeah.
How do you strike the balance in terms of, which you try to spend your time seeking out, and which of them do you make more money on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the commercial side, always you make way more money than working for a nonprofit. And I think that I've been able, I just understand that I need a balance of both, and I don't have that balance right now, and I don't think I've ever had that balance, but I'm constantly trying to pick projects that I totally care about and that I want to see through, that are maybe don't pay as much, and then fund it with the commercial projects, and I'm still striking that balance. Still figuring it out.
I wanted to compliment you on the skies in so many of your photos.
Thanks.
The clouds and the layers, beautiful.
Thank you.
I was wondering, did you get formal instruction in photography, or is it mostly self-taught?
I took one photo class in high school and botched pretty much every roll of film from in the darkroom. And I think that practice, and then just recently I've started to seek out workshops. There's a really great filmmaking workshop here that also focuses a little bit on photography through the International Wildlife Film Festival that has been really great. And then also talking to peers is how I've learned, but a lot of trial and error, a lot of error.
Yeah, I'm curious, obviously you've had mentors in your career, and I'm curious about your personal approach to mentorship as far as seeing other people.
Yeah. Oh man, I would love to do that, and I think I have best found mentorship right now through my peers by sending batches of images to look at. And I don't know if that falls under mentorship, but I think having a group of peers to pass work around to has been really helpful, and hopefully I've been helpful in that process. But I'm definitely interested in the future, especially young women, in the career of adventure photography. There's not a ton, and so always looking for people, and I always try and answer emails with questions.
If I could add on to that.
Yeah.
Like your subject matter is so present focused, but you obviously have a conservation and future focus on that thing.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
I noticed a lot of the themes that you had through some of these different photography projects was change. Whether through like because of the natural disasters or through like cultural and social impacts. With the case of Indonesia, you mentioned how they're undergoing Sharia law.
Yeah.
And then conversely with these farmers, they're coming into more like conservative herding.
Sure.
Are these social and cultural things welcomed within that community, or is it something that's kind of like an outward pressure that they don't exactly agree with?
That's a great question. If I understand you correctly, you're asking, is the change that subjects are going through, are those like outwardly pressures forcing them to change, or is it kind of a self-motivation? Am I understanding that? I think both. I think the ever-changing climate is driving a lot of ranchers to different calving seasons, and especially my fiance and I have a small farm too, and just noticing year to year when crops come in, when crops die, those sorts of changes is definitely, I would say, outwardly from a climate and weather perspective. And then I think socially too, there's a lot of cool programs that are motivating ranchers to be more into regenerative land work and motivating by helping with costs or maybe like feedback and awards for doing good work to protecting their land. So I would say it's a combination of both, and it totally depends on the people that you talk to, or at least it has been for me. Yeah, thanks. Any others? Sure.
So for this current project that you're going into, who's the audience for that? Like, who will end up seeing this images?
Sure. I was talking to Joanna about a project. We're specifically talking about ranchers and regenerative land work, and it's people outside the ranching community, and maybe also people within the ranching community that are the word conservation can spark a lot of, I think, concern depending on people's background experience with it. And so talking to people both in the ranching community to say this is working for people and it's worth putting money into, and you might have to take 2 steps back, but things move in the right direction when you do it in a way that benefits wildlife and collaboration. And then people outside of the ranching community that might have a view of ranchers or agriculture as negative. Yeah, if you have any ideas of where that might be, let me know.
And then I guess my other question is, through this whole process that the journey you've been on, what are some of the surprises that have popped up for you?
Surprises have been a lot about self-employment or working for yourself and what that looks like year to year and even project to project. And then I think I'm always amazed at people giving me the time of day when you're talking to someone in a project or you're trying to photograph, and sometimes the amount of access that a person, I don't love the word subject, but that a person who you're photographing allows you into their life. And when I was in Missouri, 2 days into that photograph project, Ernie and his family invited me to live with them for a week, which was amazing access because then you get to photograph them when they wake up at 4 and when they go to bed at 11, and every moment in between that. And there's a lot of kind people in the world. Yeah, that's always been nice and surprising. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Do you work through any associations like the Adventure Travel Trade Association or Rural Economic Development Association? Because it seems like they would be natural opportunities for what you're doing.
Yeah.
Afterwards, because I've worked a lot with both of those.
Yeah, please. I haven't done any work with associations, and not for lack of wanting to. I think I'm realizing there's a lot of opportunity out there that maybe isn't just so hyper-focused on the outdoor industry or direct nonprofits that reside in Bozeman or based out of Bozeman. Yeah, so let's chat afterwards. Sure.
How do you know 3 weeks how did you come up with that number? You
Sure.
stay out in the field. Is it trial by error, or is it depend on the season, or is it migration, or what is it?
Yeah, great question for those that didn't hear. How do I know that 3 weeks is enough time to be in the field? For me, I feel like it takes about 1 week to settle into a place and to at least get a rhythm, and for people in that, especially if it's a small community, people to recognize me, and then by 2 weeks, people recognize you if you keep going back to the same places or if you're spending time with the same people. And I would say 3 weeks is minimum long-term projects are always nicer, like multi-month or multi-year, because then people just know the rhythm, and maybe at the end of 2 weeks, someone is a little bit more comfortable with the camera around my neck and being in front. And some people react to it just fine and will go about their business, and a lot of people will say, well, what do you want me to do with my hands? And I'm like, well, just do what you do. And so 3 weeks has just been kind of the amount of time that I feel like myself have settled into the project. Ideally with more on the back end of that. Any others? All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.